We all have our trials, but we're never alone. That's what makes our trials triumphant. Trials and Triumphs with your host, Pastor Ladina Boo.
Oh, good morning. We have that loud noise going on there. Is there an AC unit blowing on your end there, Nancy, or anything?
No, there's nothing here.
Nothing there.
Nothing.
Okay, well, we'll get by that now. Okay, it's Pastor Ladina Boo from Stockton, Missouri again. And I have brought back Nancy Norton again because we had such a horrible problem with the feedback and everything the last time she was here. And I really want people to hear her testimony and get the opportunity to know how God changed her life so very much. And so, once again, I'm going to let Nancy just go ahead and relay her testimony to us. And then after that, we'll have just a little discussion and see how things are going in your life nowadays. So, why don't you go ahead, Nancy?
All right. Thank you. I'm so excited about being here. I am a grateful follower of Jesus Christ in recovery for chemical addictions, codependency, and a lot of character defects. And my name is Nancy. I knew from an early age that I was different. I felt so alone, even having two older brothers and a sister a year younger than myself, the baby of the family and the object of my mother's affection and devotion. My father, who named me and took great delight in me, was my biggest cheerleader throughout my entire life. I could do no wrong in his eyes, and we were tight. My mother, the product of an abusive, alcoholic family with lots of secrets, was herself addicted to alcohol and extramarital affairs. My childhood was plagued with abandonment, physical, verbal, and emotional abuse, neglect, manipulations, and many unhealthy manners of relating. I learned deep shame at an early age from the dramatic responses to normal childhood issues. I walked on eggshells every moment of my life. I was full of fear from the raging fits of a drunken, out of control woman who was supposed to love me, take care of me, and teach me how to navigate life on earth. I hated to go to bed at night because I was deathly afraid of the darkness and the huge spiders that I was certain were underneath my bed. And my large entourage of stuffed animals protected me at night. My parents divorced when I was 14. And I was thrown into a new home, a new school, and a new phase of my mother's alcoholism. Bottles of vodka could be found everywhere. Prescriptions of barbiturates became commonplace, along with frequent fits of yelling, screaming, crying, and plate throwing. Her interactions with me became stronger and more accusatory in nature. I was frequently blamed for her lot in life and innocently took responsibility for her alcoholism. I was just like my father, which caused her immeasurable grief and pain. At age 14, my response was to act out. I had no friends in my new community, and I easily gravitated to the other misfits and orphans. I began drinking, smoking, missing school, and became sexually active. The dynamics with my mother escalated to a critical level, causing me to run away 3 times during my freshman year of high school. I returned to my father's house where, while he worked on his new social life, I continued my path with sex and drugs and rock and roll. We were a Christian family, at least on Sundays. I was confirmed at age 14, just after the divorce, and I remember it vividly. There was a rainbow in the sky that day, and my mother burst into tears. I learned about the covenant God had made with his people after the flood in Genesis 9:13. My rainbow I set in the cloud, a sign of the covenant between myself and earth. I knew I was one of God's chosen. I just did not know how to find him. Fast forward to college, where I began drinking abusively, using drugs, and was quite promiscuous. God intervened and placed members of an organization called Navigators in my path. I accepted Christ as my Redeemer, finding forgiveness for my sins through his sacrifice on the cross. I was reconciled with God through the blood of Jesus. I felt an immediate sense of peace and contentment with the world and an excitement about my future. I was immediately drawn into a community of loving people who discipled me and taught me many of the fundamentals of living a good Christian life. Within 4 weeks of accepting Christ, I received the phone call that my mother was on her deathbed in a coma. I have never felt such pain as the day I learned of her death at age 47 from alcoholism. But I now had God to comfort me and friends to stand by my side. My immediate response was to clean up my act and walk a better path. I gave up all drinking and drugs. I became a serious student, met my future, and lived happily. I met my future husband and lived happily ever after. Fast forward 15 years, 2 children, 1 divorce later. I had so much to be grateful for. I had a relationship with God, was active in numerous ministries at my church, and was a highly respected person in my community. But something huge was missing. I had spent years in therapy, had suffered through a tumultuous divorce, and felt disconnected from my friends and community. I looked like a big success on the outside, but I was a complete hot mess on the inside. I never felt good enough, which caused me to become an overachiever. I never felt accepted, which caused me to become a people pleaser. I never felt love, causing me to get into relationships with unhealthy people. I had great jobs, I had power, I had clout, I had respect, but I had no peace. I prayed for a place where I could be a devoted disciple who could truly serve God with a whole heart, but I didn't have one. My heart was broken. I relocated to the Detroit area. I was naive and vulnerable and needy, and quickly found myself addicted to crack. My life spiraled completely out of control during a 2-year crack binge. It consumed me. It controlled me. It ran my life. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. My thinking became paranoid and my behaviors erratic. I lost my job and my friends and my family. I lost my mind. I had become so angry at God for not responding to my prayers for help that I had allowed myself to be taken over by anything that would hide the pain, the shame, the guilt, and the loneliness and disconnection that I so desperately longed to be rid of. Although attempts were made, I was unable to escape the darkness of my addiction and made the decision to commit suicide. My car accident ended with a totaled car, 2 schools on lockdown, 3 taser shots to put me down, 2 felony charges, 8 misdemeanor charges, a hospital stay, and jail. I was so relieved because my demons couldn't hurt me in jail. I finally felt safe. And there began the rest of my story. The court system offered a program called Intervention in lieu of Conviction for first-time nonviolent offenders. Having been a Sunday school teacher and a worship team member, I fit that category with one important exception. As I began the process of being tested and retested for drug use, I was on a frequent basis found guilty of relapse. I attempted to fix myself through intellect. I attended a 10-week intensive outpatient program, gaining an encyclopedic knowledge of the brain chemistry of addiction. And I filled a great big toolbox full of relapse prevention methodologies. And of course, immediately upon leaving the program, I relapsed again, which began a spiral of darkness as I realized that my addiction had become unmanageable and my life was out of control. Upon the prodding of the court system, I stepped up my recovery program and became involved in AA, my first 12-step program. I moved into a sober living house and began seeing an addictions counselor. This was a very dark time in my life, having lost my job, my family, my friends, and my sanity. I attended meetings daily. I was not allowed to work and was not allowed to do any service work due to my people-pleasing addiction. It was at these meetings that for the first time in my life, I began to feel an acceptance from people who understood me and loved me just where I was, a crack addict, freshly rescued from the gutter. It felt so amazing and gave me a hope I had never felt in my life. Knowing I was a Christian, a close friend recommended that I try Celebrate Recovery. I began attending and immediately started my first step study. My life began to change in substantial and measurable ways. I began to learn that I was not alone, that others shared my insecurities, my hurts and pains, and that with God's help, I could find sobriety, self-worth, and peace. I still had a looming court hearing on the docket, and given my relapse history, everyone in the court system was recommending that I be incarcerated for a minimum of 6 months rather than the intervention program originally offered. During this time, I discovered Jeremiah 29:13, which says, "You will find me when you search with your whole heart." These words stirred me in a way I had never felt before. I made the most difficult and important decision of my life. If God wanted me to be incarcerated, I would go with full joy, accepting whatever circumstances God allowed to be laid in my path, and I would glorify Him wherever He sent me. This is where I discovered just how deeply God loves me and how involved in my life He wanted to be. Everyone in the courtroom was in awe when the unknown visiting AA judge heard my story and granted me intervention. All of my charges were dismissed and expunged upon completion of an 18-month intervention program. God reached down and rescued me, giving me a second chance, even when I was so undeserving from a human perspective. I had read in the Bible that God loved me, but now I began to feel that love deep in my heart. My recovery took on a new life as I began to include God in every step I took, and the pun is intended. I learned that my addiction was a symptom of the intense pain I felt deep inside from things that had happened to me decades before, some of them so deep I had no idea they existed. I began to face my anger at God for putting me into a family where I was not loved as I should have been because of an alcoholic mother. I began to face the shame that had inadvertently been taught to me by my alcoholic mother, who herself had faced intense shame becoming pregnant as a teenager during a time when this was a hidden and shameful experience. I began to face my fears, the most significant being the fear of my mother's raging, which manifested itself as a deep, irrational fear of spiders. The roots of these issues ran deep and would manifest themselves in my everyday experiences in a very magnified way. I would have a $500 response to a $5 issue. As I learned to explore the roots of my emotions, they always led back to fears of abandonment and rejection. Instead of numbing these emotions with one of my many addictions, I began reaching to God, to people God had put in my recovery life, and to the Bible to replace the lies I had been taught with the truth of God. I learned that I was deeply loved by God and nothing I did could change it. I learned that God convicts, He does not condemn. There is no room for shame in a relationship with Him. He shows me mercy, grace, and forgiveness, and He forgets my past as far as the east is from the west, and my fear of spiders is gone. I began the forgiveness process with both God and my mother. I released the intense feelings I had harbored so dearly for so many years. I realized that God had not abandoned me nor forsaken me. Rather, I had never opened the door of true relationship with Him, even as a Christian. I had attempted to be in a relationship by doing, not being. Once this door was open, my life was flooded with His mercy, love, tenderness, and presence. I publicly forgave my mother, knowing in my heart that she truly loved me, but was unable to remove the powerful demons from her own life. Immediately upon forgiving my mother, my childhood memories took on a new dynamic, as I could now see so much of the goodness that my blinders had blocked in my anger and unforgiveness. The worst enemy I faced in recovery was myself. I had a bad case of stinking thinking. I had spent so many years practicing these unhealthy thought patterns, which I had either created as a survival tactic or had been taught to me in my day-to-day experiences by those who loved me. I am so grateful to my first sponsor, who insisted that I make a 10-point gratitude list on a daily basis. This began the process of renewing my mind, helping me to see how much goodness really exists in my life, removing me from my own pity parties, and eventually changing my automatic thought patterns. I began to see my many character defects that showed up in my thinking, including judgment, unforgiveness, resentment, bad attitudes, offensiveness, and pessimism. I asked God to show me these patterns and help me replace them with thoughts and beliefs that would be glorifying to Him rather than poisoning me. I have also realized that the trauma I experienced as a child created negative automatic responses in my life as an adult. I am facing these unhealthy responses on a daily basis, being willing to look at things with a new godly perspective so that I can live with the peace and joy I have desired for so long. And most importantly, I have begun to look at myself and others the way God sees me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made and designed to be in a relationship with the Creator of the universe. I am worthy of love just where I am because of the work Jesus did on the cross. He provided me with a way out. I had to open the door. I have also learned to accept and embrace the valleys and deserts that come my way, as they provide me with important opportunities to rely on God and grow closer to Him. Difficult circumstances no longer define me. As I scan my life, I can clearly see the places where God has given me healing: my chemical addiction, approval addiction, people-pleasing addiction, shopping addiction, my codependency tendencies, issues with control, removal of facades and masks, healing from childhood trauma, living more authentically, accepting myself as God created me for His purpose, not my own, accepting and loving others and seeing them as God sees them, and most significantly, looking at life from an eternal perspective, not the earthly perspectives I used to live by. This has been the most difficult work I have ever done, but I have found a freedom and sense of peace and joy that I have never experienced before. I encourage anyone interested in making eternal changes in their life to jump in the deep end of the pool and trust God. He is faithful and He will meet you there. I am a grateful follower of Jesus Christ, addicted to peace and codependent on God. And thank you for letting me share my story.
It's always a good thing when we're codependent on God, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The only
Absolutely.
codependent relationship you really ought to have in life is one with God, because no matter what situation you're in or what situation you're facing, if you could learn to trust Him and trust His word, I find that things work out so much easier that way. You know, I
That was a hard
always,
lesson for me to learn, a very difficult lesson to learn.
Yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of people. It's just really hard to um, give yourself fully to the Lord so that He can help you get through any situation you happen to be in. I know with my stepson, I watched for 20 years as he was walking down that heroin addiction,
Oh,
alcoholic pathway. And then he got into a very good program here in Springfield, and he is now walking with the Lord daily. It's
oh,
been
how
an amazing
wonderful.
adventure. And his wife was also addicted to drugs. She was a meth addict. And
Mm,
so she went to prison a couple of times, and everybody kept telling her, "You're never going to quit, and your kids are never going to be back in touch with you. You'll never get your kids back," and so forth. And she's walking a beautiful life now and has her daughter
oh,
back at home with her. So, it does make a difference. And I find that when people share their testimony, they also help others learn to see, there's a chance for me. There is hope,
yes, there is hope. There is
and you go out.
definitely hope.
Yeah, you share your testimony about anywhere they let you share it, don't you? Don't you
I
go to
will.
different?
Yes, I do. I am happy to share it. I am honored to share it. I will say that early in recovery that it was not easy. It was very, very difficult to make the choices I need to make,
Hmm.
and it has become a practice now rather than something I have to think about to make the wise choice instead of the unwise choice.
Hmm.
But I did go through a lot of relapse and I did have a lot of tumultuous times during my recovery. And I remember during the time I was attending AA, I clung to the promises of AA. I just
Hmm.
needed that so badly. I had tried everything. I had tried counselors. I had tried overachieving. I had tried everything in the book to figure out what was wrong with me. But it took 12-step recovery to help me find out who I really was, to get down to those deep pains inside of me, and finally finding the healing I needed and leaning in and trusting, and most of all, surrendering to God to
Hmm.
make the changes I need to make.
Yeah, I know. I was in what is it, Al-Anon, the
Mm-hmm.
the family portion of it
Mm-hmm.
with my son and my stepson, and even there, I drew a lot of strength from the other people around me
Right.
and helped me figure out how to walk that path with my family members and help them
Mm.
and bring them closer to the Lord, but not, you know, fly into this fit of He's making me crazy. I don't know what I'm going to
Right.
do.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe you don't realize as an addict or an alcoholic or something, the people in your family, those people close to you, they're going through that same thing with you because your life is impacting them and
Yes,
it makes it
indeed.
difficult. Yeah. Uh,
And on the flip side of that, people who have not experienced addiction don't understand the complete stronghold it has on you. There is
yeah.
nothing or anything that is going to get you out of there short of finding yourself at the bottom of the rope, which
Hmm.
in my case was a suicide attempt, or a
Yeah.
miracle from God, which does happen as well.
Yeah. Your suicide attempt. Did you purposely run your car into something?
I did. I did. I
Yeah.
did. I look back on it. I had been on a fairly lengthy binge, and my mind was a mess. And the demons that were in my mind at that point in time were indescribable.
Hmm.
And I never ever want to return to a place as dark as that again, ever. I
Yeah, it
love
sounded pretty.
walking with Jesus.
Yeah, it sounded pretty wicked there with two schools on lockdown and
Yeah.
3 taser shots.
Yeah, it was definitely the low point in my life. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I will also say that God has, it's a public thing. People can go out there and see my story. Um, God has taught me a lot of things through that because it has affected that incident has affected my life in a really dramatic way. I have an orange jumpsuit picture available to the public, and my record is out there. And that can be very frightening when going to get a job. I worked in a very conservative field. I worked in the field of accounting, and I worked for CPA firms, and they didn't want people like me there.
yeah.
And so
Most people still want people like that.
I've had to learn a lot of trust in God on a moment by moment basis because of that. And I've learned how to experience or get rid of that fear of rejection through dealing with that experience. God
Hmm.
has given me the opportunity to learn to trust Him every step of the way. And He's given me every job that I've needed, every opportunity I've needed since then, even
Yeah.
when the world rejected me.
Well, it's amazing what God can bring to pass. Um, and I've noticed a lot of people saying that their worst enemy when they're facing recovery was themselves. They have grown used to this particular lifestyle and can't
Mhm.
see a way out of it. And, it's, they don't seem to understand what it does to their own children and their family and so forth. Were your children negatively impacted by your drug addiction, or did they just kind
Well,
of stick to the side?
fortunately, fortunately, my children were both adults and out on their own when this happened. And both of them were very, very loving and helpful. I remember the day my daughter visited me in jail. I couldn't believe that I was sitting there in that situation.
Hmm.
But I will say, during my relapse phase, I went on to hurt my daughter very, very deeply when she tried to help me with my recovery, and I just walked all over her. But she has since forgiven me. I've made amends with her. And I currently have an extremely good relationship with my son and daughter in law and my grandchildren. And I couldn't be more grateful. There is recovery, there is hope.
Yeah. And there's also joy when you get to see those
Yes, absolutely.
grandkids. It always makes, whenever you can make amends with your own family and your friends over your past actions, it's healing to you, it's healing to them.
Oh,
And, you know,
yes, so
without
real.
that healing, you tend to fall back into the bad stuff. You have to have
Yes.
that healing for everybody that you're close to. I know a lot of times I used to end up with a lot of kids at my house, and
Mm.
I took in 90 over the years that didn't belong to me.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, I'm a little crazy, but that's okay. God made me this way. But people
Yeah.
would get angry with their children over trying to get into gangs or getting drunk all the time and things, where they weren't old enough to do so, but they were falling into the habits of the world and all the
Hmm.
youth that they were around, because there were a lot of different gangs in the area where I was at.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different gangs everywhere right now. But
Hmm.
you know, being able to take them into my house, because a lot of times they were kicked out with just the clothes on their back, and
Hmm.
show them some love and care that they probably didn't have before because they were falling into a pattern of what they'd watched their parents do. And that
Right.
always just irritated me to no end. It's just like, no, come on, live in the house, it's fine. And um, but I have to say, every one of them, by the time they left my house, had a high school diploma, and part of them
Oh,
were planning
that's
their college
beautiful.
careers and so forth, because somebody took the time to listen to them and
Yes.
um, tell them about the Lord and teach them a little bit. And you know, it, I don't care if you were raised in a Christian family or not. A lot of times, um, you're a Christian on Sunday, and when church gets out, you go back to walking the ways of
Yeah,
the world. And
exactly.
that's
I
not a good
actually had
thing.
I actually had quite a few mentors in my life. When I went back to live with my father, my best friend's mother became what I called my adopted mother, and she was a devout Christian. And
Hmm.
she actually caught me ditching school one day and came and got me and brought me home and shared Jesus with me that day. I didn't accept him in my heart that day, but that was one of those marked moments in my life that I have never forgotten.
Hmm.
We have to reach out to people in need. We have to
Yeah,
reach out no matter what they look like or what they're going through and show them
and,
Jesus' love.
and the Bible says doesn't tell us not to judge people, but the Bible says to use righteous judgment. And I don't
Mm,
think you can use righteous judgment if you can't reach out and find out what a person's story is. You've got to figure out how did they get to this situation, and unless you ask those questions and take the time to sit with them or talk with them, um, you don't know that, and so you can't really bring them
yeah,
to healing if you don't know what's happened.
right.
And you know, righteous judgment was one of the things, because people tell me the Bible says do not judge. And it says the Bible says use righteous judgment. It's not the
Okay,
same.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's I am so grateful for this journey. And I one of the best pieces of my story is that at this point in my life, I am able to love and help other broken people, and that is what I love doing most.
do
And
you
I
still
love hearing
participate?
people's stories. Pardon
Do you
me?
still participate in part of the programs like Celebrate Recovery or anything like that?
Absolutely. I'm a leader
Yeah.
in Celebrate Recovery. I I am also participate in a program called the Great Exchange Weekend, which is a recovery retreat for women who have suffered trauma. It's
Hmm.
based on Isaiah 61, the Great Exchanges. And at these weekends, we help women. And this is where I got much of my recovery from. It's how I got down to the roots of my lies of rejection and abandonment, and I was able to replace them with the truths and the love of Jesus. But
Hmm.
through experiential exercises, we're able to help women open up their hearts, open up their wounds, deal with their pain, deal with those lies that they've learned to believe about themselves, and replace it with the honest love of God. It's a
Yeah.
very miraculously life changing process. And
Yeah. We all seem
I'm
to
so grateful
internalize
for it.
so much. We
Yes.
internalize so much, we get this judgment in our head, and maybe it's what you've
Mhm.
heard your entire life from your mother, your father, whoever, a husband. And
I'm
yeah,
unworthy. I'm unlovable.
yep, unworthy, unlovable.
Mhm.
You're not smart. No, that comes
Yes,
out way
that's another
worse.
one. You'll never
Yeah,
amount to anything.
yeah, yeah. You'll never do anything good in the world. I lived with
Yeah.
a lot of that growing up.
Mhm.
Okay,
Did
and it's
you?
like,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how do you get that? I'm the only honor student in this house, you know.
Oh no.
And you're not good enough. Okay, well, they let me in the club.
Well, I was on the opposite side of that spectrum and I became the overachiever because that's when I got validated. But
Uh-huh.
I never knew that my self-worth didn't depend on that. It had nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
And
if you learn your worth of the Lord and learn how you are
yes, amen.
His daughter, you
Yes, I
are in the
am.
same classification as Jesus Christ, and you are I always told my daughter I didn't raise any princesses, and then after she got baptized, I had to change that. It's like, okay,
Oh,
you are our princess in the eyes of the Lord. So I
that's
can't use
beautiful.
that word
Absolutely
anymore.
beautiful.
You know,
Hmm.
yeah, the kids were the big thing in my life. I supported so many, and so I didn't. I got into the promiscuity when I was younger because that made me feel loved, where I didn't feel
Hmm.
loved at home,
Right.
and so that makes a big difference in someone's walk. But so if you got children, if you got other family members, I've taken in my cousins' grandkids and everything else.
Hmm.
Love them. Tell them every day that you love them. Tell them
Yeah.
every day how special they are, and point them in the direction of Christ, and you will have so
Amen.
many fewer problems in life whenever you treat your kids that way. They wake up and they try to please at that point and understand that they're just trying to do what the Lord wants them to do. Teach them that. So,
God has
well,
given me that opportunity as well. I actually help take care of my grandchildren, and I get to speak into their lives on a daily basis. And what a reward after the mess I made of my life.
yeah. How old are your grandkids?
One will be 10 next week, one is 7, and one is 3.
Nice little spread
Yeah,
there. You
yeah,
tell the one
they're the
happy
apples of
birthday
my
from
eye. I
yeah.
will do
Well,
that.
happy
I will
birthday
do
from
that.
everybody at Acts Ministry and Acts Media
I
Group.
will do that. Mm.
Yep. If they were here, I'd put a happy birthday hat on their head and we'd sing to them. They probably wouldn't like that though.
Wonderful.
I don't have the voice for that any longer. So,
If I could just mention real quickly that there's great programs out there for recovery called the one for women is called the Great Exchange Weekend, and that can be found on the internet. And the other one is called Edge Venture, and it's a similar program for men. And they're experiential retreats that really help people get to these roots that are sometimes buried so deep to help them find real recovery. And I highly recommend them. And I
yeah,
also recommend Celebrate Recovery, a great Christian 12-step program, which is not just about addiction, but it's about any kind of hurt, habit, or hang up.
right.
So if you're a sufferer of abuse or you have a food addiction or whatever it may be, it's a great place to go and get some healing and some fellowship.
And most towns around here, uh, the churches have their Celebrate Recovery programs. You know, you
That's
can get
great to hear.
Celebrate Recovery. You can talk to any of the churches around and probably find that program. And I do recommend it myself. I've helped out with that program a few times, and so it does make a difference. And
Yes,
Mr.
it does.
Matthew is back, so that means that we're getting ready to shut down here. So anyway, I thank you, Nancy, for coming on again, and
Oh,
I
it
hope.
was a pleasure to be here.
Yep. Well, I will be talking with you again soon, I'm sure. Have a
Okay.
wonderful day.
Thank you so much. You too. Be blessed.
Thank you.